Hey, John King, thank you for your patience. I hope that I don't have internet issues. I had to reboot my computer, so I'm a couple minutes later than I had expected. And this is a really important topic. And so I want to dive right in and really help you understand what it's about, what's going on, and why all of this matters. So, first of all, if you aren't aware, there has been a lawsuit going on for a while between basically a class action lawsuit that home sellers were suing real estate agents. And they sued real estate agents saying, look, you guys unfairly worked together to force us to pay for the buyer's agent, to pay for the person who represented our competition. You didn't give us a choice to not pay for that person. Now, I think that I'll give you the big picture first, and then I'll tell you my thoughts. I think that what they said is, look, it's unfair. You forced us to pay for somebody else who is representing the competition, and you colluded to make sure that your costs, your price, what you charged stayed super high. That's essentially what they said in a nutshell. And on Tuesday, a jury in Kansas City said, we agree that the National Association of Realtors and a couple of real estate brokerages who did not settle, other brokerages settled prior to it going to court, they lost, and they lost billions of dollars. It's 1.8 billion dollars, but because it's considered an antitrust lawsuit, it can actually go as high as $5-something billion. This is like a boatload of money. Here's what it ultimately means, though. It means that they're arguing that it's not appropriate for the seller of the home to pay for the agent representing the buyer. Now, why has that overall been the practice? Because first of all, buyers don't have a whole bunch of money in their pocket to pay for their down payment and their closing costs and pay for their real estate agent. And so a seller says, well, you know what? I want to sell my home, and if we think back to the beginning of time, seller said, I want to sell my home. And so I'm going to hire a real estate agent to help me sell my home. Now, they don't have to hire a realtor. There's such a thing called a for sale by owner. And in which case they said, hey, I don't need an agent. I can do it by myself. But those who feel they can't do it by themselves, or they shouldn't, or they don't want to, they hire a realtor. Now, in the beginning, they said, hey, realtor, go find me a buyer. Well, that's fine, but the realtor only knows so many people. And so over time, the listing agent said, if you just gave me a little bit of extra money to pay an agent who finds a buyer for us, call it a finder's fee. We're going to pay an agent who finds a buyer for us, and everybody wins, because now that agent has an incentive to show our property instead of waiting and hoping that their buyer can pay them for their services. And so that's really ultimately where it came from. And the lawsuit said, well, that's not fair. They shouldn't have to pay for that. They paid more money than they needed to. But here's the truth. Every home seller was a home buyer at some point in time. And under this practice that happened on a regular basis, every single seller, when they bought their home, likely didn't pay anything for their real estate agent. So they got off the hook. They basically got no charge for one transaction, and they got double charged for selling that home. Well, that means that you were charged twice for two transactions. That seems pretty fair, but the lawsuit didn't talk about that. And so what's ultimately at stake here is the future of what is allowed in real estate transactions and who pays for who. And so I want to oversimplify this. And so I put together a really simple slide deck here that hopefully will help figure out, starting with, how do realtors get paid? So there's four people in this transaction, in this breakdown. You've got the seller of the home. You've got the listing agent. That's the person who represents the seller. You've got the buyer's agent. Now, I didn't want to confuse things, but that's technically called the selling agent because they sold the buyer on wanting to buy this home. But most people, when they hear the word selling agent, you think, no, that's the agent that represented the seller. That's not true. So I'm using simpler terms and calling it listing agent and buyer's agent. And then you have the fourth party, which is the buyer. So let's talk about what happens in this process. So first of all, the listing agent, let's make this a little bit bigger. The listing agent signs an agreement with the seller. And they say, hey, Mr. Seller, I'm going to list your home for sale. Now, they're going to be any dollar amount of commission that they're going to charge. the average has historically been between 5% and 6%. Now that's part of what the lawsuit was about, is saying, hey, you guys were trying to fix this commission to make an exact dollar amount. I'm not going to weigh in on that part. I'm just going to tell you it is historically been the approximate average, somewhere between 5 and 6%. I've seen it as low as 3 or 4%. I've seen it higher than 6%. But here's the bottom line. The listing agent gets an agreement. The seller says, I'm going to pay 5 to 6% on average for the sale of my home. Now, in that listing agreement is an agreement that says, I, the listing agent, am going to pay the buyer's agent a certain dollar amount. So if it's, let's just simplify it and say, hey, it's 5% total. I, as the listing agent, am keeping 2.5%. I'm giving the buyer's agent 2.5% as a finder's fee for bringing us a buyer. So now the property's been listed, that dollar amount has been decided before you even show up and look at that property. And now you, as the buyer, you write the contract and the seller accepts. Now there's a lot of back and forth, there's a lot of negotiation, but the seller accepted your contract. But guess what? There is zero contract between you, the buyer, and your real estate agent. Think about that. If you've purchased a home, I'll bet you 99% of the time, 99% of you never signed an agreement with your realtor. As a matter of fact, part of this lawsuit has to do with the fact that realtors have somewhat inappropriately said, hey, I'm free. I'm your agent and you don't have to pay me anything. I am absolutely free of charge. Well, that isn't really true, because you're paying more for the home. If the seller didn't have to pay 6% to the listing agent, the theory is the seller wouldn't have to sell the house for as much. I don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think sellers are, I don't want to say greedy, that's not the right way to say it. Sellers want the maximum price they can for their home. Who blames them? When you own something and you can say, hey, I can sell this home for $400,000 or I can sell it for $420,000. You're going to choose $420,000 most of the time. So if you can say, hey, I can still sell my house for $420,000, but now I don't have as much in fees to pay, you're not necessarily going to lower the price of the home. You're just going to pocket more money. But the assumption in the lawsuit was the buyer pays for it because it's included in the price. I think that the price is based on what other homes have sold for and what the market will bear, and that the buyer really has not technically paid for their agent's commission, but it is not free because it is part of the transaction, and buyers just never understood how their agent got paid. Well, this lawsuit, the outcome of this lawsuit has a lot of potential implications. And so let me explain to you big picture where we're at and what's happening. So big picture, the first lawsuit is done. The real estate industry lost. That lawsuit only covered sellers in the state of Missouri. So if you are a seller somewhere else, there's a potential lawsuit coming that they're going to try and sue. There's more lawsuits out there. There were already 3 or 4 that had been in play, and then there were 4 more that were filed on Tuesday afternoon when this ruling came out. So there's more lawsuits to come because, well, that's what attorneys do. They find an opportunity to sue for something and they do it. That's their job. I don't blame them for it. We all have a job. So what's going to happen is over time, there's going to be rulings. There's going to be appeals. This could go all the way up to the Supreme Court. But in the meantime, this is a federal court. And my understanding, in a federal court, after the ruling, the federal judge writes up his findings. He'll determine how much the penalty is actually going to be. And he has the option of writing an injunction. An injunction basically says, hey, until somebody else above me overrules me, this is what has to change effective immediately. Now, I understand that injunction supposed to be that those final findings from the judge, which might include an injunction, is supposed to be presented within about 30 days, supposed to be written within about 30 days. So therefore, sometime in the month of November, again, I don't know this to be a fact, but I've read it in a few different sources, that we should be hearing that. So the first shoe to drop is going to be what's required. What are they going to require? Are they going to say, hey, sellers are never, ever allowed to pay for a buyer's agent's commission? Are they going to say, hey, there has to be an additional disclosure? there's lots of things that could come up as a result of this, but a lot of people are saying, oh, don't worry, this isn't going to change anything because they're going to, already the National Association of Realtors has said we're appealing this jury decision. Well, that's great, but this injunction from the federal judge can make changes happen immediately. And I've already talked to a few agents locally in Northern California who have told me about some changes that are already going to be taking place. And I'm going to share those with you in a minute on what I think is going to happen. So what I want to do is I want to give you some brief talking points on what the heck really happened. So this trial, it's called the Sitzer-Burnett lawsuit. And that's just based on who the actual main plaintiffs were in this particular lawsuit. Happened in Kansas City, Missouri. And 3 entities that did not settle, National Association of Realtors, Keller Williams, and Home Services of America, were found guilty of colluding over commission rates with damages awarded close to $1.8 billion. Okay, so what's the impact? Well, it could change how buyers agents get paid. So as I talked to you about that breakdown before of who makes what, it can really change how buyers agents can get paid. And the biggest thing I want to talk about is the concern that buyers might have to pay their own realtor. And that is possible, but there's a lot of little ways around this that I want to explain because it's already part of the California Association of Realtors contracts. Now, every state has different contracts, but most of my buyers, most of my audience is in California. And so the California Association of Realtors has already kind of put things into place to deal with this. And I'm going to explain to you what that looks like, because I'm going to bet you're going to start seeing what I'm about to talk about a lot more often. And if you're a realtor listening in, I think you should consider taking this strategy because I'm going to be hearing it more and more. By the way, the industry fought back. They said, hey, this is unfair. This isn't right. What we've been doing has been happening for over 100 years. And it isn't unfair to the seller. It's really a practice no different than when you go to buy a new construction home. Okay, so I want to explain this real quick because this was an analogy I thought of. As a matter of fact, this morning as I was driving my mom to the airport at 4 a.m. I was telling my mom about this and explaining to her this whole thing. And by the way, before I go any further, I got a good group of people watching. I'm thinking a lot of you guys have questions. So no matter where you're watching, if you have questions and you're watching live or if you're watching recorded later, please, please, please put comments into the comment section. If you're watching live, I'll be able to see those questions pop up and I can address them during this live stream. If you're watching recorded, I can catch it later and I can answer your questions later. Anyway, as I was talking to my mom this morning on the drive to the airport, and I was explaining it to her and I said, she goes, well, was that kind of like when I bought my new home and I had a realtor go show me the new home and they just showed up and signed me in and they got paid a commission? And I said, yeah, it's actually a lot like that. And that model of how new homes do things may be the model of how resale homes go. So let me explain to you big picture how new homes work. The builder has a sales agent that represents the builder. That's the listing agents in a resale world. And a lot of builders say, look, buyer, I don't care if you have an agent or not. I'm not paying for that agent. I'm paying for my agent. My agent can do all of the work for you. If you want to bring your own representation, you have to pay for it. Now, other builders say, yeah, that's true, but I need to make sure that the realtors in our neighborhood are bringing their buyers to me. And if the realtor says, hey, I got a buyer who I can take to this resale home and that seller will pay me the commission, or I can take them to home builder A who doesn't pay me a commission, or I can take them to home builder B and home builder B will pay me a commission equal to what I would have made if I had taken it to a resale home, take them to a resale home. And those builders say, I need that realtor's help. They control my future buyers and I want them to bring those buyers to me. So some builders have said, I'm willing to cooperate. I'm willing to pay the buyer's agent as long as they are the first person to bring somebody to the transaction. As long as the first person to bring this buyer to my community, then, hey, you're the reason that I got this buyer. I'm going to pay you for bringing me the buyer. That's literally what happens in the resale world right now, 100%, 99% of the time. I think it's going to shift to being less than 100% of the time. because sellers now have the option, and really it's going to be mandated. My expectation is going to be mandated. Sellers have the option of saying, do I or don't I want to pay the buyer's agent? Up until recently, it was mandated they had to pay something to the buyer's agent. Now, technically, you could put as little as $1, but the court said, look, even if they could put $1, you still forced the seller to pay for the buyer. You forced the seller to pay for the buyer. Liliana, it's a great question, so I'll cover that in just a second. The court said, even if you force it to be $1, you're still forcing the seller to pay for the buyer's agent of some form because you cannot make it zero. That's a critical piece that I think was part of why they lost this lawsuit, because you had to pay. Whether you got to pay a small amount or a big amount, you had to pay. Okay, so I see the real estate market moving that direction where sellers are going to say, hey, maybe I don't have to pay. And I'll cover that in a minute. I'm going to first bring up what Liliana said, which is, she said, wouldn't that be steering? In a way, yes, but in a way, no. And here's why. Because up until today, realtors had an ethical decision to make if they were taking you out to look for a new home, and that new home didn't offer a commission. Well, if a realtor could find a similar new home that did offer you a commission, they could justify, hey, I took them to this one because I'm getting compensated, and it's exactly the same as this other one, so I didn't harm my buyer. Okay, so steering has to do with putting them in a position that benefits me and harms them. Now, there's been the ethical decision where realtors say, look, my buyer, really the best property for my buyer is this new home subdivision that doesn't pay me. Well, I want what's best for my buyer, so I'm going to let them buy in that subdivision, and I'm just not going to get paid for the work and energy and time that I put them in my car and drove them around. And that's actually a big piece of what I'm about to get into on what the outcome of this could be. Before I go there, let's go back to my slides and let's see what I got next. The MLS. So I want you guys to understand what an MLS is. Kathy, okay, so I'm going to cover that, Kathy, yes. So guys, feel free to post your questions. I'll get to them as I go. So what's the MLS? The MLS is the multiple listing system. The MLS allows for the properties to be what's called syndicated, meaning you go onto Zillow, you go onto realtor.com, you go anywhere, you're going to see all the properties that are listed for sale, which is part of the reason why a lot of buyers say, I don't know if I need a realtor, because I know what houses are out there. I can see everything online. The problem is those get online because of the multiple listing service. The multiple listing service is paid for by the realtors, and then the MLS is selling the information to the Zillows of the world, and then Zillow ends up selling the buyer's information back to the realtor. It's really a weird circle. I'm not going to get into the whole Zillow piece because that's a different dynamic of what the outcome may be here. But ultimately, the MLS system might be in jeopardy. The National Association of Realtors is already on the ropes. They're paying out a whole bunch of money. The CEO just yesterday morning of the National Association of Realtors quit, retired, said, I'm out. So they're having some scandals at the top. They're losing members. Redfin said, hey, we don't require any of our realtors anymore to be part of National Association of Realtors. If the National Association of Realtors is sued too much and they dissolve, then it falls to the state associations. And if they get attacked and they dissolve, the local associations go away too. Now, I was having a conversation yesterday with a group of business people, and we were talking about this topic. One of the guys is from New Zealand. And he goes, well, John, this sounds exactly like the system in New Zealand. There's only a realtor that represents the seller, and there's no realtor that represents the buyer. The buyer just finds it online, goes and picks a property, and then they hire an attorney to do some paperwork, and that's it. And as we talked more about it, I said, well, how do they find it online? And he goes, oh, yeah. So there's a private company that manages that. There's a private company in New Zealand that gets the listings from the listing agent, and they collect a pretty hefty fee from the listing agent for them to put their listings on this portal. That portal might look something like a Zillow, okay? So now what you see is how this could change. It could actually cause major issues with the local associations of realtor that manages the Metro List or MLS systems. And now you run into the issue of now it's all controlled by a private entity. Now it's all controlled by a for-profit entity who's not working on behalf of the realtors, but working on behalf of themselves. So the MLS system is potentially in jeopardy here. There'll be another way. There'll be another solution. There'll be another way to find the properties, but it's definitely a potential game changer. And as they said in this information, the MLS systems are definitely in jeopardy, and they play a critical role in the collecting and sharing of listing information. All right, so let's talk about what this might look like. So this is the same slide I talked about earlier, but now you got a seller who signs a listing agreement, and that listing agreement may only say, I'm paying whatever, 3%, 2% to the listing agent, and I'm paying nothing to the buyer's agent. Okay, so it's optional for them to include the buyer's agent's commission. That is a change that has already happened. It's already optional for them to include a buyer's agent's commission. But understand, and I need to underscore this, I need to underscore what you need to understand. And that is, if you as a seller think, man, I can save money by not paying the commission to the buyer's agent. In a market like this right now, you're not going to get buyers picking your home. And I'll explain in a minute, because it has to do with how's the realtor going to get paid. Because buyer's agents are still needing to earn money, or they're not going to do the work. So if you're a seller, and you're like, hey, this is going to save me a bunch of money, you need to be really careful about listening to the advice of your realtor, and be even more careful if you have a realtor that says, of course, list with me because I'm positive you don't have to pay for the buyer's agent. That's no different than the realtor that says, hey, I know everybody else told you your house is going to sell for 500, but I can sell it for 550. So go with me because I can sell your house for more. They're lying to you. They're doing what we're calling buying the listing. And they're saying, hey, I'll tell you what you need to hear because I know that over time, you're going to end up lowering the price. And you've got a contract with me that I have 6 months to sell your home. I'll just sit and wait. If your house sells at 550, great, we're all happy. If it doesn't sell, I'm still your realtor, and I'm going to beat you down to get you down to the 500,000 that everybody else said, because that's really what the house is going to sell for. But they're telling you what you want to hear in order to get you to list with them. Well, those same people are going to tell you what you want to hear and say, you don't have to pay for the buyer's agent. That's illegal now. I don't know, maybe at some point in the not too distant future, it could be. I don't know. But today it's not illegal. Today it's, and I don't think it's ever going to become illegal. But they're going to tell you, no, you don't have to do that. Don't pay for the buyer's agent. That's bad. I can save you money. Work with me. That's not going to happen in today's market. Now, if we rewind back to 2020 and 2021, if these rules were in place back then, that was a hyper-competitive market. You had buyers who were looking to buy a home and sellers that wanted to sell a home, and every seller had 20 buyers wanting to buy that home. And the buyers were offering $10, $20, $50, $100,000 over the list price, waiving all of their contingencies. If you don't know what a contingency is, I've got great information in my YouTube library. I won't explain that right now. But they waived all of their contingencies. And guess what? Sometimes back in 2020 and 2021, they said, I'll pay for the realtor's commissions as well. That happened. Well, now it's clear that the listing agent can say, look, it's a super hot market. It's a seller's market. You don't have to pay for the buyer's commission. And I do agree, there will be more than enough buyers who have the money to pay for their own commission. So you're in trouble if you're a low down payment, low funds buyer when we get into a hot market again. And we're going to get into a hot market again. So let me kind of finish where this is going to go, and then I can give you a little more detail about what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is right down here at the bottom, you see where between the buyer and the buyer's agent, there's going to be a new document called a buyer broker agreement. I am not an attorney. I am not a real estate agent. I am not trying to explain to you how these documents work, but I'm going to do it anyway. A buyer broker agreement is basically the same concept as the listing agreement between the seller and the listing agent. And it says, hey, I, the selling agent, the agent representing the buyer, I represent you. We're going to sign this contract before we go out shopping for homes. And you agree that you are just working with me. Now they can decide, hey, you're only working with me on homes within this particular city, within this particular region with homes between this price and this price, or for this particular address, and it's for a particular amount of time. And this documents existed for quite some time, but very few realtors used it. Okay, what it basically says is, hey, you as a buyer, you agree you're going to work with me and nobody else. And if you buy a home with somebody else, you're still paying me because we have a contract. You've agreed that you are going to pay me on a home that you buy. It's exactly the same as a listing agreement. If you sign a listing agreement to sell your home, and then 2 days later, your best friend calls and says, hey, I saw you're selling your house. I'll buy it from you, and we can skip the realtors. You legally can't sell it to your best friend and skip the realtors. You signed an agreement that says, if I sell my house in the next 6 months, you are my realtor and I am paying you. This buyer broker agreement is the same concept between the buyer and their agent. And I've already heard a couple of brokerages say, we are strongly encouraging this document to be used effective immediately. And I personally have a feeling that brokerages soon are going to mandate it. Because it can be just for a property. So it can be for, hey, I'm going to show you this property, and if you buy it, I'm your agent and I'm going to get paid. But here's the key. In that document, you as the buyer are agreeing how much money to pay them. So you're saying, hey, I'm going to pay you 3% or 2% or 1% or 10%. 10% is a little high. Okay, I'm going to pay you a certain percentage of any house that I buy that meet these criteria within this time frame because you're my agent. That means that if you go buy a home where the seller is not paying for the buyer's agent's commission, then you as the buyer have to pay me this amount of money. Now, Kathy asked a really good question. And she said, can a buyer put their payment to the realtor into their home loan? The answer right now is no. Here's the truth. They won't even let you put the money you owe in loan fees into the loan. Many people mistakenly understand and think that, man, when I buy a house, the fees to buy the house, those get built into the loan. 99% of the time, they do not. Okay, the fees, your underwriting and processing, your credit report fees, your appraisal fees, title company fees, all those fees, you have to pay or you have to get a seller credit to pay. Okay, so can you get a seller credit to pay for this? Of course, that's what we're talking. The sellers have been paying for it all along, but if the seller's not paying for it, I can't loan you extra money. Now you can put a smaller down payment as long as that exists. If you were planning on putting 20% down and you got enough for 20% and the normal closing costs, well, now you got to put 17% down because you got 17% for down payment, 3% to pay for your realtor, and the normal closing costs. So we can build it in that way as long as the loan program allows you to put a smaller down payment. But guess what? In that scenario, you're now not putting 20% down. So now you have mortgage insurance that you have to pay every single month. So be aware that there's implications to this and it is not just able to be added to the loan amount. But let me give you one more idea of how this is creating some unintended consequences. Veterans. VA loans currently have a stipulation that said the veteran is prohibited from paying any realtor commissions. The veteran is prohibited from paying any realtor commissions. So effective immediately, if a seller is unwilling to pay for the buyer's agent, the buyers, if they're a veteran, they're prohibited. They're not allowed to pay for the realtor's commission. So now either the realtor has to say, look, I'm out. That's okay. You don't have to pay me. I did all this work for you for months, but you don't have to pay me. And oh, by the way, you now have nobody representing you. So good luck, buyer beware, caveat emptor. Or the buyer says, I'm not going to buy this house. I can't buy this house because if you don't pay my commission, my realtor's commission, I'm not allowed to pay it and I'm not going to proceed. Can you see where this becomes an issue? So ultimately, here's what I see happening right away. I see that the buyer broker agreement gets signed and it says, hey, you're going to pay me 2% of the purchase price as a buyer. You're going to pay me 2% of the purchase price as your representation of the buyer. Now you go to a listing and the listing agent says, yeah, we're paying 1.5% of the price to the buyer's agent. Then you owe the other 0.5%. Now, one of the things that you're going to notice is that there's now a requirement, and you'll see it if you go to the Zillow or you go to Redfin or anywhere else. you'll see there's a spot on there. They have to disclose what percentage is getting paid to your agents. So now you can say, you could make a choice. Liliana asked about steering. This is kind of the opposite of steering. It's the buyer saying, look, I can't afford to pay for my realtor. I've agreed my realtor is going to make 2%. So I have to find a listing that pays at least 2% for the realtor. Okay, so that's going to cause buyers to ignore the listings that aren't paying enough to pay for their realtor. And in this market, that's going to hurt the seller. With interest rates that have pushed up to 8%, by the way, this week's been the best week for interest rates in a long time. Here we sit on November 3rd, and rates have gone down to the low 7s, and in some cases, the high 6s. Best week we've had for interest rates in quite some time. But here's the bottom line. As a buyer, you're going to say, I'm only going to write an offer on a property that you're paying my agents the commission. And so those sellers that are saying, I'm not paying anything, I'm going to put 0 on there, you're losing a huge segment of potential buyers. In today's market, that's a problem. In a hot market, the problem is with the buyers with a small down payment. So if you or somebody you know, or if you're an agent and one of your buyers is saying, hey, I don't have a lot of money for a down payment, but I want to wait until interest rates get better. When interest rates get better, more people are coming into the market. Everybody is waiting until interest rates get better. So when interest rates get better, there'll be more competition. And that means the sellers don't have to pay for your real estate agent. Now, could you do it by yourself? You could do it by yourself. Could you say, you know what, John, I don't want to have a buyer's agent? You can. It's kind of like representing yourself in court. You go to court and you say, hey, somebody is suing me. Okay, cool. I can't afford an attorney, so I'm just going to represent myself. Okay. What do they say? An attorney who represents themselves has a fool for a client. Yeah, I think that's how it goes. An attorney that represents themselves has a fool for a client. Why? Because doctors don't perform surgery on themselves. You are not an expert in this, but it's going to create unintended consequences. It's going to create an incentive for home buyers to say, I can't afford to pay for my realtor. I can see the listings online, so I'll just go myself. And now you're negotiating on your own behalf. You don't know what your options are to negotiate, and you end up getting a worse deal most of the time. Most of the time. In today's market, if you go directly to the listing agent actually makes both sides of that. If there was a split, they get both sides of the split. So there's a benefit to the listing agent. And they're saying, hey, I'm going to work hard for you because I'm getting paid extra. But in this case, the listing agent makes no extra money because their payment was preset at a set dollar amount, and there's nothing being paid to the buyer's agent. So now you're asking them to do extra work, and they're like, I'm not going to do the extra work. I'm not going to help you out. I'm not representing you because I'm not making any money for representing you. So you're on your own. That's going to create some major unintended consequences. So here's ultimately what the final piece of this puzzle looks like. And that is the buyer, when they write their contract. Let me see if I have another slide here. I do. Okay. So the buyer, when they write their offer, in the offer on the second page, right, like 5th line down on the purchase agreement is a checkbox that says seller agrees to pay buyer's agent commission pursuant to attached buyer broker agreement. So therefore, you have a buyer broker agreement between the buyer and their agent, and you have included that with your offer and said, hey, I know that you aren't showing a commission to my realtor, but you need to pay it. So I'm putting in this offer a copy of the buyer broker agreement, and I'm requesting that you pay for it. The thing is, the seller can respond with a counter offer and say, nope, I'm not going to do it. Take the house and pay your own realtor, kick your realtor to the curb, or don't buy the house, I'll sell it to somebody else. Everything is negotiable. Commissions have always been negotiable, but the buyer and the seller never negotiated over commissions because it was agreed upon in the listing agreements. I believe that's going to change. I believe it is not going to be agreed upon in the listing agreement as a mandate. That's my take. I'm guessing, I'm projecting, but here's the deal. You absolutely, as a buyer, can still buy a home and not pay for your realtor's commission. So don't believe the headlines. Don't believe the scare tactics, the clickbait that says, oh my God, you can't buy a home without paying your realtor's commission. But I'll tell you that at some point in the future, it's going to become a lot harder to do. It's no different than having to buy a home and asking for seller credits. It's possible in any market to get a seller credit, but it's a lot easier in today's market. In fall, winter of 2023, it's a much easier time to get a seller credit than it was in 2020 and 2021. So ultimately, what's going to happen? We don't know. What I do know is everything is the same right now, but the most important thing I want you to remember if you're a buyer is don't be surprised if your realtor says, hey, I'm not going to take you out to look for homes unless you sign this agreement that says I'm your realtor. And gang, let's be clear. Realtors are not nonprofit organizations. They don't get paid by anybody to put you in their car and drive you around to different homes in different neighborhoods. And some people argue they make way too much money. Like, I found the home online and they spent 10 minutes showing me the home. We wrote the offer and they're making huge amounts of money. First of all, they got to split a large portion of that with their brokerage. They have to pay for insurance and they have to pay fees. So there's a lot of money of that big check that they're losing. But here's the other piece. Imagine if you went to work every day and your employer said, you know what, most days when you go to work, I'm not paying you. Some days I'm going to pay you really well though. Would you do it? Maybe, maybe not. Most people like stability. They want to know how much money they're going to make every day. Now, if your employer said, hey, I'm going to send, you're going to come to work. Oh, taxes. Kathy brought up taxes. Yes, you also have to pay a lot of money in taxes. But if your employer said, hey, you're going to come to work and half the days you work, I'm going to not pay you. And half the days you work, I'm just going to pay you what you normally would have made at any other job. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't work for free some days just to make an average amount on other days. You have to make a greater amount than average on the few days that you actually get paid. That's the job of a realtor. So to say they make too much money it's all about perspective, but they do a lot of work that they never, ever get paid for. So when you say, oh my gosh, my realtor got overpaid for this transaction because they didn't do that much work. Guess how many other times that realtor has helped you or other realtors, other buyers, and never gotten paid. So the risk here is the worst case scenario is the buyer's agents, they kind of disappear. There's a potential if sellers refuse to pay for buyer's agents and buyers refuse to pay for buyer's agents, then we might go the way of what happens in New Zealand and say, you know what, buyer's agents just don't exist. You negotiate with the seller and the agent representing the seller, and then you hire somebody to write up the paperwork for you and you pay a flat fee. But that's a pretty scary proposition because again, now you're representing yourself in that negotiation. And negotiation is one of the most critical things that you're paying your realtor for. Negotiation and overseeing the transactional details, making sure that you successfully close, and being an advocate on your behalf. Having that buyer's agent on your behalf is critical. And so do not go by the wayside and say, I'm just going to do it myself. And the truth is, stick with the realtor that you're working with. Don't be worried if that realtor says, I need you to sign this agreement. It's going to become more and more common. So find the realtor you connect with. Ask the realtor, what happens if we don't get along? Can I get out of the agreement? Most realtors are going to say, and Kathy brought up another one, they negotiate repairs. So throughout the process, you don't know what to ask for and what repairs to ask for. The listing agent's not going to offer to say, hey, these are the repairs you need to be asking to get fixed. So just recognize, guys, there's going to be a lot of misinformation online. I wanted to give you this information for you. I want all of you to share this with everybody you know. If you know anybody who's thinking about selling a house, anybody who's thinking about buying a house, please share this video with them because I think it provides really good context. And the fact of the matter is, the commissions are now becoming more transparent and more negotiable. That's not a bad thing, but it doesn't mean they're going away. It simply means how we look at it and who pays who is shifting. And it also means it becomes more critical to work with a lender that you can trust, because there are going to be times when your realtor has to back out. When your realtor says, look, I can't represent you because my insurance won't let me represent you for free. You don't have the money to pay you. And ethically, I want you to get this home, even though they won't pay for me. So I'm out. That means the last person that you have on your side is your lender. So make sure you're picking the right lender, somebody that you can trust, because if you're working with somebody who's an online lender that's in Topeka, Kansas, that has no idea how our market works, you're going to be even worse off. Okay, so hopefully this has been helpful. Please, if you have any questions, I'm gonna chat for another 30 seconds. So if you have any questions about anything, now would be the time to post your final questions. Otherwise, guys, I really appreciate your help in sharing this message. And if you have any questions about anything, please don't hesitate to give me a call. I too am not a nonprofit organization. My role is to help you with the money side of things. So if you're thinking of buying a home, selling a home, and buying something else, I have affiliates nationwide. I can do loans in pretty much, I think, 47 out of the 50 states, personally licensed in 4. So I really appreciate your time today. And make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you're not already watching on YouTube. So thanks everybody for listening. Hope you have an absolutely